And then there's all that pruning and pinching and deadheading. And there really are many different ways and reasons for pruning plants. When we talk about pruning, we think mostly about woody plants, trees and shrubs. You talk about going out and pruning your plants. Generally, you're thinking about pruning your hawthorn or pruning your crabapple. But even perennials need to be pruned, and certain types of pruning can benefit herbaceous perennials and annuals as well. Pinching is one of those types of pruning that can really assist with the growth of a plant, especially perennials and annuals. Pinching is actually where you actually just remove the growing point of the plant. And back in basic botany, I'm sure you talked about how there are hormones that are produced by the terminal bud. Those hormones then kind of move downward along the stem, and those hormones kind of prevent the buds in the axils of the leaves from branching out and growing. They will branch out and grow, but more slowly because of the effect of the hormone. If you remove that terminal bud, pinch that off, and they call it pinching because it's usually just very tender tissue that can be pinched off with 2 fingers and discarded. It doesn't even need to be cut. That removes that apical dominance and that hormone that prevents those buds from growing. Those buds grow, and you end up having much bushier plants as a result. So now you've got 4 stems where you had only 2. And if you were to then pinch each of those, you would have 8 stems where you had 4. And if you do this for a period of time during the growing season, before you let them start to then form flower buds, you will end up with a much bushier plant. Okay, so that's pinching. Deadheading is probably one of the most common things that you hear about gardeners doing. And I wonder if the Grateful Dead knew anything about deadheading whatsoever when they came up with the Grateful Dead. I don't know. But deadheading is simply the removal of the dead flower head. And it really is just the flower head that you're removing. And a lot of times, just down below that main flower head that's removed, those next 2 buds will branch out and form flowers also. So then you'll have 2 more flowers down below that. Those are dead-headed, and 2 more may form below that. It really depends on the plant, but sometimes if you just study the plant as you do this deadheading, you might find that a precisely placed dead-headed cut can really stimulate more flowering to occur. And whereas if you left that flower head on, you may not have any further flowering after that. And the main reason for removing that flower head is so that if you're not growing the plant for the seeds that are being produced from the flowers, there's no sense in having the plant put the energy into growing those seeds. If you're just growing it for the flower is done, the seed pod's not ornamental or productive or anything, pinch that off. It allows the plant to put its energy into something else. And sometimes that is more blooms. Cutting back can be done in a couple of different ways, and here's one of those situations where if you kind of study the plant as you're doing your deadheading, you might find that you have a terminal flower head or your main flower head, and then just below that you have another flower head that will be forming as soon as that terminal flower head is done. So that's the lateral flower head. And then there's another lateral bud even down below that, and that lateral bud may then form another flower. And so if you carefully deadhead, you can allow those other flowers to form and grow and get more flowering out of the plant. Now another type of cutting back is to cut back at the end of the season or the beginning of the season, or even just after flowering when there's been a flush of bloom. If you cut off just that entire flush, I'm thinking about dianthus or pinks, they make kind of a mound. The mound will be covered with flowers, and if you just cut back so that all those flowers are cut off, then a whole new fresh crop of flowers will grow. But even if another crop of flowers doesn't grow, what probably will happen is new foliage will grow, and that new foliage will cover over the area where you cut back and make at least a nice fresh mound of foliage. So cutting back can really just refresh the appearance of the garden as a type of pruning. And then there's thinning, which is one of the woody plant type pruning techniques. And we're not going to go into detail with this, but you can see before thinning and after thinning, by removing just some of the excess growth, opens up the plant, allows better air circulation, and allows for better form on that plant. And I know that when you have the section on woody landscape plants, you will have more discussion about pruning. But for herbaceous perennials and for annuals, disbudding is another type of cutting back. Disbudding is when you remove all of the buds on a stem except for the main bud. So, and I'm going to have Mike put the pointer fingers in the right places here, but that's a side bud. And then there is the main bud on that plant. And then there's another side bud kind of up and to the left. And all of those are, there you go, all of those are from one plant. That other bud, the very large bud kind of in the middle to the left of the picture, that is a main flower bud on a disbudded stem. A stem that had the smaller buds removed so that all the energy could go into the one main flower. That one main flower then will be larger than any of the other ones would be if you had left them all. Now this is a peony, and peonies are very, very commonly disbudded. Right, so removing those two flower buds allows the main flower bud to become larger. But sometimes there's a disadvantage to disbudding on peonies. One of the disadvantages is that the flower head then is so large and so heavy that the stem can't support it anyway. Another one of the disadvantages can be that you have fewer flowers. But if you're really just going for the biggest flowers, dahlias are like that too. People growing dahlias for show will disbud the dahlia stems and have just one big dahlia flower. And if that's what you're going for, disbudding is the way to get it. So those are just some of the pruning techniques. I'd really like to recommend a book called The Well-Tended Perennial Garden by Tracy D. Sabato Oust. And she has been called the queen of perennial pruning because she has really taken it to a higher level and determined what perennials should be pruned in what ways in order to get the most flowering out of them, to get the longest season out of them, and does a very beautiful job in her book of showing illustrations of how you determine what you do to different perennials to get the most out of them from pruning.